Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the this meeting of the Strategy and Resources Committee at the County Council. It's very good to see we have 100% turnout today. So thank you to all for being here on this revised date. This meeting was supposed to have been held about 10 days ago, but the date needed to be changed as a result of the period of national mourning. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and tweet during the meeting. But if I could ask that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate, that would be really helpful. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds at any point, I will adjourn the meeting and we will make our way downstairs and out of the entrance. And the muster point is at the far end of the building. The first item on our agenda is apologies for absence and declarations of interest. So, Michelle.
I've received 2 apologies, one from Councillor Criswell and Councillor Costello is substituting, and one from Councillor Count and Councillor Ambrose Smith is substituting.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest before we go any further? Neil?
Yes, I saw my register, but just to declare that with respect to item 10, I am, of course, the director of this land.
Thank you very much. I think it is helpful to have that said at the beginning of the meeting, so that's very useful. So we'll move to the first item on the agenda, which is the minutes. We're being asked to approve the minutes of the Strategy and Resources Committee meeting on the 27th of June as an accurate record. If any member does not agree, please would you raise your hand now? I don't see any objections to the proposal to approve the minutes, so we will take that as carried unanimously. Thank you. The second item on the agenda, we're actually going to take item 10, which is the this land annual business plan and progress monitoring as the next item on the agenda, as we have the chair, David Meek, and the chief executive in attendance. So we will take that next. And apologies, I have forgotten the action log. Okay, I'm sorry, we'll go back briefly to the action log. The updated action log is included in the published papers for this meetings, and all the actions are marked as complete. So unless there's anything further on that, we will in fact move then to item 10 on the agenda, which is the This Land Business Plan and Progress Monitoring. So I will come first to the Director of Resources to introduce the report. Tom.
Thank you and good afternoon, everybody. So this is the main item under This Land this afternoon is the annual submission of This Land's business plan. And as the chair has already said, we welcome David Meek as the new chair of This Land and David Lewis, the chief executive, to the meeting this afternoon. They'll speak shortly on to give a few further details on the business plan and the recent developments at the company. And I should acknowledge for the council's part, from our perspective, the progress that's being made by the company. In receiving This Land's business plan this year, I would draw particular attention to recommendation C of the report, which reflects This Land's broader than commercial objectives, their commitment to additional affordable housing and environmental, social and corporate governance, and how that intersects with changes in the environment for the County Council, particularly the constraints we face around borrowing, lending and accounting for our capital costs. I would confirm again to the committee that This Land's business success is very important to the Council, and we set out in the report that the Council currently has on loan to the company £113 million worth of loans. Through this business plan, we find a credible but also ambitious pathway for the repayment of those loans and also interest across the coming decade. The report goes on to set out the various oversight and scrutiny that the council and through this committee has in place of the company. And clearly that ongoing vigilance, awareness and scrutiny and good governance is crucial to ensure that ongoing success. As I said, David will give more detail on the content of the business plan shortly, but I would take the committee's attention to section 3.5 that explains some of this scenario and sensitivity analysis that's been performed on the proposals. I think for this land's part, they favour the baseline and low growth scenarios as perhaps the most likely situations to play out over coming years. You'll see that a further CCC query scenario was added, labelled as cost inflationary. And we're particularly mindful of that at the moment, given some of the recent economic changes. What I would say, though, looking at the results from the scenario analysis, is that the larger variable isn't so much the final surplus facing the company, but the timing of the repayment of all of the borrowing, and in the context of £113 million worth of borrowing. And the company is operating on a very long-term planning timescale. As well as the economic performance and the housing market dependencies, another key dependency for the company is purchase of future land from CCC, and further progress has been made during the last year to identify more appropriate sites for the company to include in its future plans. At section 4 and section 5, we report on some of the monitoring arrangements the council has in place, and principally the follow-up work by the consultants Avison Young, following up their review, their major shareholder review, which reported to this committee in January. We see recorded there that there's been progress on risk management, staff recruitment and alignment of the company's objectives with the council's priorities. And at section 4.4, further recommendations are set out and next steps, including building appropriate expertise in relation to the additional affordable housing aspirations. 5.2, we confirm the monitoring arrangements in place around the sites that are currently under construction. And at 5.3, the ongoing annual external audit of this land's plans. And then just finally from me, before handing over to David and David, the other recommendations on the front of the report confirm a further non-executive director board appointment, authorise changes that further enhance the governance of the company's shareholder agreement, and give permission from this committee for the council's part in relation to 3 named sites where we need to reflect the latest proposals from this land received in the business plan into the permissions that the council currently holds. That's all I'll say in introduction. If David or David want to.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues. It's great to be here and present our 2022 business plan. We're very excited about it. We are very conscious of our obvious obligation to pay back the principal debt as well as the interest. But that's one of the things we're undertaking to do to you tonight. You'll see that through our business plan. We're very much engaged with you and your communities, and that's a very important part of what we do. We think about the environment and the social aspects and governance as well. So I think I'll pass over to David Lewis to run through that, obviously a little more detail, and obviously we're here to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. I'll be very brief. I'll briefly talk about the new business plan. I'll talk about the market, and I'll talk about our active site at Over, which is doing incredibly well. So we are very fortunate. We've had a very positive and very strong 18-month period, which has allowed us to significantly increase our cash position and de-risk the business. At the same time, this has given us the opportunity to refocus the business to look at the more sustainable, wider objectives, which we are required to deliver as we move forward. I'd like to thank the members who responded to the ESG survey, which I sent out 2 weeks ago. There's been a really positive response, and we will take on board those comments as we prepare our ESG policy. So the business plan is a refinement of the earlier business plan, but we are proposing to significantly increase the amount of homes we're going to build in Cambridgeshire to approximately 930 new homes over the next 10 years. In addition to that, we will be significantly increasing the provision of affordable homes to 396 units, or approximately 42% of our total output. That's a significant increase compared to the last year. We're able to do this because we've been very fortunate in relation to the strong land market and have secured a number of strong land sales, which has brought a significant amount of money into the business. But also we are now active across 5 to 6 sites across county. We will build by the end of the year 35 new homes. And we're also now able to commit to the longer term beyond the repayments of the loans themselves in 2028 and 2029. Just touching briefly on some of our sites, we have 3 large sites. These are known as our master developer sites at Barnwell, Warts Causeway and Soham. They are progressing very well with land sales at Barnwell and shortly at Ediver Park. We've also made a commitment to increase the level of homes we build at Soham, alongside the provision of a significantly enhanced and enlarged medical centre. But we've also been working with officers to identify new sites for the future development pipeline. We've identified 16 potential sites, half of which will be purely for affordable homes, with the other half, the other 8, for the provision of open market homes. Now, this will significantly de-risk the business moving forward. And we're able to do this without any additional funding at this stage. So we are able to deliver these wider benefits, more homes and more affordable homes without the requirement for additional lending. So the 2022 business plan is a very positive statement, demonstrating a clear commitment to the county moving forward over the next 10 plus years. Very briefly, I'd like to talk about the market because there is a level of uncertainty with recent headlines. We do recognise that the wider UK economy may become challenging. I also recognise that there's been a number of headlines in the media saying that mortgage companies are withdrawing products. They are, but they're also coming back to the mortgage market next week with new products. The mortgage market has approximately £290 billion worth of lending this year, and they're looking to increase that to £310 billion the following year, which is well in excess of the pre-COVID levels of funding. So the mortgage markets and liquidity, while the interest rates will be increasing, are in a very sound position. We are fortunate. Cambridgeshire has got an incredibly strong market. We've got a very active sales office at Over. It's a 53-unit scheme, providing 40% affordable homes. We are still taking reservations. We've taken 2 this week, which is a demonstration that fundamentally the Cambridgeshire market and the Cambridge market is very strong and typically able to robustly handle any wider downturn in the UK economy. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, both of you, and to Tom for his introduction to the report. We will move to the debate on the papers in a moment, and I hope you'll all have lots of questions for the 2 Davids. I do just want to say that if members wish to discuss the exempt appendices, we will have to exclude the press and public. So if it's possible to have this discussion without references to the exempt appendices, that will be very helpful indeed. And I'd just like to draw your attention to the resolutions that we'll have to do at the end, which will form part of our debate, and are an important part of it. Okay, open for members' comments, questions, anything. Really none. Richard.
Well, firstly, it's good to see the committee and welcome. And hopefully we are in the process of putting the council's relationship with this land onto a different footing, and hopefully you would reciprocate on that. I think you should say something about that, though. I think we've been in a place that wasn't optimal, to put it very politely, and you've only given a comment on the situation today and going forward. And I think in terms of inspiring confidence from the county council and all who are watching and supporting us, I think it's important that we say some things in public about the changes that are taking place. So I would be grateful if you comment on that. To Tom, if we're allowed to ask questions to him, it does seem that the slightly rosier forecasts that we're seeing are pretty wholly dependent on us as a county council providing more land. I'm not at all criticising that or against it, but clearly we have different options of realising our assets, and we need to be convinced that this is the best way that we can do so, and we're taking proper decisions in the council's interests and not just propping up this land. So I would be grateful if you could answer that. Finally, on ESG, I'm sorry, I haven't filled out any questionnaires. I'm not sure I've received one, but I haven't filled them out. But as you know, this council with Councillor Dupre on my right, leading the issue, is moving very hard on bringing forward our net zero carbon commitment for Cambridgeshire as a whole. And although clearly you're still to make some decisions in this area, it would be very interesting to hear from you your understanding about what sort of housing is going to be needed that will be consistent with meeting our net zero target. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was mostly for Tom. So.
Yeah, so I think to come specifically to the point about further land from the council, so it's important to clarify that is a big feature of this land's business plan and has always been so. One of the issues that we were aware of and AY really brought to the fore in their shareholder report was the particular areas of land, the particular scale that was envisaged, and the plans that were kind of held on the this land side for those up to the previous iteration of the business plan didn't match the council's expectations and weren't realistic. So I think it is a major step forward to have removed those assumptions and got to a more realistic, more sustainable, more linked to affordable housing position going forward. I think the other things I would say is it will of course be a decision for members on all individual sites. There is much more work to do actually on defining the mechanism and making sure we get that right. And I think the council would say that there were missteps in terms of how land was transferred last time, in terms of the scale, the timing, the kind of position in planning permission stage when that was done. And it's important we don't repeat those mistakes. And then, of course, the other thing I've got to say is that to a certain extent, these developments are circular. This land's success is the county's success. We do have a really key, we are the only stakeholder in that, and some of these developments are economic. So it is right that we will always have this different asset management decisions, and this land as well can look at alternatives if the council decides not to proceed in the way envisaged in this business plan. But it is something they've consulted on with us through this process with this committee when we last came to the report. And I think from my own part, there are potential win-win scenarios through progressing in that way, but more work to do still.
Perhaps I can pick up on the point around changes to your point over the evolution, shall we say. And we've obviously changed a lot of the key staff over the last 4 years or so. David was officially made the CEO, although he was interim CEO for a good year as well. But about 6 months ago, and has done an excellent job. We were very aware and conscious that the engagement with you as stakeholders was I'll use the phrase very arm's length at the beginning, and we were conscious that wasn't the right answer. So we've made those changes. We have a regular stakeholder update. I think it's 4 times a year. open forum for anyone who wishes to attend, and we take that very seriously. It's very important to us to know what you want, from the community perspective. It's not just about the money part, is it? And we get that totally. So we bring the expertise on house building and everything else to bring that to make the money and the assets work and deliver for you, but also listening to the other smaller details, which are very important as you go through your community engagement. So we're listening to all that. We've been through a pretty hefty change in our approach to all of those things. We take it very seriously, and thanks to our leadership as well for guiding us on some of those lessons as well. So hopefully you're seeing a very different experience with this land. We take those responsibilities very seriously. So as I said at the introduction, it's not just about capital interest, although it's a pleasure to do both. It's all those other things that we do as well. So, and perhaps David, you want to touch on ESG?
Very much so, and in particular the homes which we build and our journey towards net zero. Compared to the wider market, the PLC market, and even the smaller SME house builders, we are significantly ahead of the competition in relation to reducing our carbon emissions. We have never built a house with a gas boiler in it and never will do. We use air source heat pumps, but we're now looking at the next generation of technologies. We also use different build methodologies. We use light gauge steel, we use woodcrete blocks, and we use the conventional brick and block because we're testing to see which is the most sustainable. So that journey towards net zero will be coming significantly quicker than the rest of the competition. And it will be set out within the emerging policy, which we're looking to adopt by the end of the year. But our homes are incredibly sustainable. I took around 2 members at our Over show home yesterday, and I'm pleased to say I think that they were quite impressed with how we are being innovative and how we are looking at things differently from the competition. Thank you.
Perhaps I can just add, if I may, the last point on that is from a board perspective, we take ESG very seriously. So we've introduced an ESG committee. We have a full third-party body helping us as well. So it's from every level, we take that very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Neil, I think.
I just want to make two comments. So one of which is pick up on Richard's point about new sites. I think that is a sign, I think, that the business is sort of growing up a bit insofar as it's looking to sustain a pipeline of opportunities, which I think is important. It's important when you think about recruiting staff. Any staff who join this land are going to be interested in what the future has to offer. And I think a business which is looking for developing an ongoing pipeline is clearly looking in the right place. And I think that's to be welcomed. Second point I would just say, and from my perspective on the board, is that there is a really, really good balance, I think, in the board between looking at the paramount importance of the financial results, which is clearly critical importance to the council, but also a recognition of the additional level of scrutiny which this land is under, not just what it does, but how it does it as well, which extends to how we conduct business, but also what we build. And I personally have been encouraging David to extend an invite to members to go to Over, because I think if members do go to Over, you'll be very impressed by what is actually on the ground, which has this land's name and this council's name associated with it. I think it's very impressive. And also how that business is conducted as well. And I think one of the things which has happened at Over is the level of engagement with the local community. Often, as members will know, tension between new development and local communities. I think it's to be congratulated, David and the team, the lengths to which they've gone to engage with the community in Over, and I hope that would be replicated in other sites which we develop. All in all, I'd like to think that this council will be proud of this land as a developer which is seen as being a bit different in terms of the way they do things and what they build to the mass market developers which we have in the county. And I think that while still a long way to go, we're seeing the steps in the right direction on that, and the sustainability of the business underpinned by this business plan. So I'd like to extend my sort of thanks to David and the team, and for the rest of the board making that happen.
Thank you. I don't think there was any need for any response to any of that, but it's very good to hear it. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions really, and one is for Tom and one for the team over there. Looking at where am I? Sorry, get to the right place. Yes, looking at 3.3 on page 139. Obviously, it mentions their payment of interest, and is that in line with what the previous assumptions were, or in respect of this land? And also, are there any, apart from interest, are there any other benefit, cash or otherwise benefits we receive because of that? And the second question is more for, if I go on to that one, is again on 3.3 and then going down to the graph on 3.6. We talk about being loan free by excluding this 6 million by 2029. Is that based on the current housing, the current sites you've got? Because obviously if we want this land to prosper, then like any building company, it's going to need finance to actually be able to do that. So I would imagine going forward, the company is always going to be borrowing money, need to borrow money so it can finance the next deal, so to speak. So just trying to get some clarity around that. If that makes sense.
Thank you for that. So we do not require any additional finance. We've got a very complex business model, cash flow model, which projects revenues and costs moving forward. Part of that makeup, though, does require land from yourselves, which will be acquired under option. We've identified a total of 16 sites. For the business plan to be successful, we only need a proportion of those. And of those which aren't developed before 2029, they will be post that period to ensure that the business continues into the medium to long term. I may just be able to assist you in relation to Tom, to one of the questions you've asked Tom, and that was, has the interest repayment profile changed at all? No, it hasn't. It's approximately £8 to £9 million per annum. And in fact, on Tuesday, we made a further interest payment in excess of £3 million. So the repayments of the loans and the interest repayments remain the same.
Come back, sorry, Jim. Sorry, Tom, did you want to?
Thank you. And so just to add to that, so yes, to confirm the interest payment profile remains the same. I think when this committee's predecessor in 2020 considered the business plan update at that stage, further lending to this land was envisaged. So extending the lending total, I think, up to 150 million and potentially further, depending on economic circumstances. And I think what this land are saying in this refresh is at the moment that further lending isn't envisaged as being required. By far and away, the large payback to the council is through interest rather than dividend or profits, and consider carefully the setup of the company. The other important benefit the council has seen in the past, of course, is capital receipts. So when the company acquired land from this land from the council, the council in turn received a capital receipt. Apart from that, there are a small amount of director fees which contribute to the council's position as well. I think just following through on Councillor Sharp's question, I would draw attention to that table at 3.4, and it is very much a part of this land's future plans to acquire further sites, particularly in that strategic lands category you can see there in terms of where expected profit is to be derived from. So that is one of the important things that the council will need to see from this land, is making continued progress on, is that future identification of pipeline and progression of those sites.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Are you happy with that?
Yes, if I can just come back, very apologies for butting in just now, Chair. Yes, I understand what you're saying, and it touches slightly on Councillor Howitt's point, obviously with the sites, in terms of making sure we as a council are happy with those sites. But presumably, from a tax point of view, this land would have to be paying the council money for those sites, because otherwise we could end up with the inland revenue not being happy with that. Yeah.
So to give clarity, absolute clarity on this, we are only able to make a purchase at market value. There were no favours for us. And equally, in relation to taxation and regulation, I think in the 1972 Local Government Act, we don't want any favours. So it needs to be, and it will be, at market rates.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of points, I think mainly to the officer on my left, but a point for David Meek. You said that David Lewis was acting as CEO for a good year or so. I'd like you to change your words to say for an excellent year or so, because without David's input, I think we would have been looking at a very different business plan today. So as the ex-chair of a defunct committee, C&I, that used to live, breathe this, I thank you for the work you've done, David Lewis, and good luck with it, David Meek. I'd like to ask a question on the sale of land. There were Councillor Hoff made some absolutely great points in his speech a little while ago. The company was in its infancy, and we all took rods and beat the hell out of the company whilst it was in its childhood. It's matured now, and it's come through, and we're teaching different lessons and learning different things. And I think that's a very good point, a very, very good point indeed. But there's 2 points I'd like to add on the sale of land. One, there were county council aspirations for the further sale of land based on the success of this land on the land that it took, if people followed that. Or I'll put it another way. We sold land parcel A to this land, thinking that land parcels next to it, B and C, could be in future sales based on what's done at A. The question I have is, if parcel A is now subject to a land disposal, what does that impact Cambridgeshire County Council, if you understand that? And the second one was in my own ward. We sold a piece of land to this land, or this land were actually asked to sell it back to the council because of school development. And that's plainly crazy. We should not be looking at any land where we've got our own future use in the council. So I'd like some guarantees that those cross silo departments within this council are working, because plainly when that happened fairly recently, that wasn't.
Well, so I think on the latter point first, one of the protections the council had in place when it transferred land was around preemption, which gave us that first refusal to buy back if there was that service need. And we set out at the time the changed circumstances at the particular site that Councillor Goldsack referred to. But essentially, I do take the point that perhaps that could have been envisaged and the transaction not occurred in the first place. I think it's a very good point around adjacent sites, plot A, plot B and plot C, etc. That will be one of the things we continue to look at as we look at the further pipeline with this land, without commenting on specifics. I think my aspiration really is for the CCC property team and the this land company to be working closely in collaboration, looking at local plans and where there are opportunities as part of the county council's asset strategy to promote sites either together or in relation to disposal sites as well. So yes, we keep that closely in mind and we'll continue to update.
Just a quick point. You're absolutely right. The preemption clause is in there. Well, I can assure you, being the chief executive that David has turned out to be, we didn't buy it back for that which we sold it for. So from county council money, that's not the smartest use of our pounds, shillings and pence. So I would ask you, really implore you there. The other point, I accept your answer on that, but I implore you to work with the officers in this section because, you know, they are very forward thinking and they've got a lot of great ideas for 10, 20, 30 years hence. but that first step in that land disposal opens that up. So if the first step changes, that's a massive and dramatic change to future plans for the council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see, yeah, Elisa.
Sorry, very quickly. Thank you very much for coming today. We're very pleased to see you. I'll give you just a few thoughts. Some are mine, some were fed into me from other people who are not in the room today. But you've done a lot of engagement with us over the last few months, and we're very grateful. We welcome the passive house commitments that are in the business plan. They're very great. We would like, I would like, this is on behalf of ourselves as the council, we would like to reflect. We talk about affordable housing, which is a great need for our region. We need to reflect on the meaning of that. What is affordable to whom, and what truly affordable really means. There are some structural problems with that, which obviously is not up to you guys to solve, would be nice. But we want to know that we collectively are reflecting on that and very aware of the reality for so many people, and we want to help. So we would like to thank you for helping us help people. That's the job. We were wondering what sort of thoughts there may be around what you might want to call ethical sale policies, in terms of what kind of, it's a new area, but it's something that we potentially might want to have a chat about potentially. And also we've talked about net zero, but we would like to also mention the Dublin nature and biodiversity side of it, which is a lot more practical and relevant to your business plan as it is today. So if you had just a couple of points on that and what we are doing on that side, would be very nice to hear. And other than that, thank you very much for coming today. It was very good.
Well, thank you very much for everyone's positive feedback. It very much is appreciated. I'm honoured to work with an incredible team and board who can make this happen. So I will be passing on your acknowledgement. So a couple of things. Biodiversity. I'm really excited about it, and I have been muting with the board a few months ago about purchasing land, agricultural land, and enhancing its biodiversity significantly as some form of offset against the houses which we build. In relation to biodiversity on the site level, all of our sites meet the new policy requirement of 10%. On some of those sites, we're looking to increase it to 20%. So it is something which we are very mindful of. I think moving forward, it will be part of our ESG strategy, because we've got to recognise that there are long-term impacts from housing developments on the environment, and we need to mitigate that. And it comes back to this net zero point. I speak to lots of developers who say that they're doing net zero, but when you ask them a few questions, they're not doing net zero. They only look at the operational requirements and not the construction emissions. So it's a very complex area, but we are going towards that direction very much so. On the point of ethical sales, very keen to have a conversation on that, very much so. Brilliant.
Fantastic.
Sorry, I might just
David.
add, just on the ESG part, that we also take that philosophy through everyone that we contract to work for and with us. We're very strict on that as well. So it's not necessarily just not all about price with us. It's about what else you do as well from a contractor point of view. That's very important, and then it's certainly part of the top level when we start any conversations with new people working with us. So just to add that point. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you both very much. I don't see any further questions. I just want to make a very quick comment myself, and then we'll move to the resolutions. The first is to say how grateful I am to you for all the work you've been doing, and how excellent it is to see just how much progress has been made in the last year in responding to the joint administration's priorities. It's been really good to see the new focus on affordable housing, and as we know, affordable housing, the affordability of housing is a huge problem across the whole of Cambridgeshire. So it's good, even if we're only doing a small amount to fix that, every little bit helps. So that's really helpful. And it's also been fantastic to see how much the relationship with local councillors has improved over the last year. That under earlier leadership, was definitely not quite as comfortable as it has been now. And I know that Councillor Gough had some experience with slightly less friendly relationships with this land. So it is really great to see that that relationship is now much better. And I think it's a reflection of the need to work really closely with communities, which is definitely something that I'd like all developers to do, but it's really good that we are. And as part of that, I think it's important to thank you both for the quite in detailed question and answer session that you held online with councillors from across the whole council. I think that was really very much appreciated. So thank you for doing that. And it was good to see just how much engagement there was from councillors across the council. I also think that I've really enjoyed hearing from a number of people about the visits to Over and how pleased they've been with the quality of that development. I do think that having actual concrete, not concrete necessarily, but actual examples of really high quality house building done with communities and with net zero as a goal is something that is really needed. So it's great to see that that's being taken forward. So thank you very much for your time today and for the new business plan. As we move to the recommendations, I'm going to read these out in full because there are quite a lot of them. I haven't heard any dissent from them, so I'm hoping that we can take them as a block, and but I think it is important that they're very much publicly out there. So the first is to authorise that a written resolution be sent from the shareholder to this land appointing the person named in the confidential appendix to the company's board of directors. The second is to receive the latest business plan from this land. And third, to note this land's objective of developing and delivering homes, the priority of increasing the proportion of affordable homes, and the commitment to environmental, social and corporate governance. D is to authorise variations to the company's shareholder agreement that enhance corporate governance following the review described at section 5.5. And E is to permit the land transactions proposed by this land at Soham Northern Malta Road and Fitzwilliam Road, as set out in the section 5.6 and in accordance with the latest business plan, delegating authority to the section 151 officer to release the council's preemptions, overage and legal charge. So those are the recommendations before us. All those in favour, if you could raise your hands now. Oh, thank you. Not quite unanimous. Thank you all very much indeed. And a big thank you to David for your time today and with councillors on previous occasions. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. We will now move back to the kind of conventional agenda item in order. So the next on the agenda is the Integrated Finance and Monitoring Report with Tom as presenting. So over to you, Tom.
Thank you. In introducing this report, I'm mindful of two things. Firstly, that the in-year position is relatively smooth and benign compared to the future year risk that we're facing. And secondly, we have two very financially consequent decisions and considerations later on in the agenda, which I'm keen to allow enough time for. Just to take the committee then to the recommendations on the front of the report. Recommendation A relates to financing the adult social care reforms. Members of the committee will be aware this is a major area of change facing local government. There is some implementation support coming forward from government, but we have assessed the business case that suggests we need to make a very proactive start in order to be ready for those national changes and commit some local resource to that. And then recommendation B approves additional prudential borrowing. The details are in the report itself. That principally relates to the capital investment in a children's home intensive therapeutic support. There is a revenue grant that's come forward from the Department of Education to finance that, so an excellent opportunity to finance the revenue side. And from a capital perspective, this is absolutely the long-term capacity that the council needs in order to manage its placement budget. And then just while I've got the opportunity, a very quick word on last week's fiscal event and where that may have an impact going forward. Obviously, much of that was focused on the taxation picture, and we wait and see the impact on public expenditure. But a couple of things to flag up from last week. I think we would expect a significant impact on treasury management. So we've seen a movement in government bonds and gilts. I have to say very, very significant movements and volatility, and we'll wait until that settles down. But I think the committee, particularly in the longer term, does need to anticipate there will be an adverse change in terms of our cost of borrowing in future years. There was also an announcement last week for additional social care funding relating to winter pressures. We are awaiting further details on what that allocation will be, and the governance in collaboration with the health service on how that will be deployed. Announcements, of course, last week on national insurance as well. That may be a saving for employers. That was something that was funded through the settlement last year, so we're analysing that as well, and we'll wait and see whether that is adjusted back out through the settlement. And we don't have a detailed report on forward-looking business planning today. That's coming for the next meeting, but it won't be a surprise to anyone to know that inflation is the significant issue. And I think what we're waiting on in terms of public expenditure is whether there's adjustments to government spending, departmental expenditure limits that reflect that. I think the indications are that there won't be, that we'll be bound by the spending limits set in the spending review last year, and that places in a position where there will be significant contraction in real terms. So I hope the committee receives that in the spirit it's intended to give kind of an interim update as further developments come forward, but I thought important to flag some of the risk forward looking from that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know that we have an amendment that's coming on this paper. So what I'd like to do is to say, are there any questions for Tom on the paper as drafted to start with? And then after that, we'll come to the amendment, if that's okay. So any questions or comments on Richard?
Could you just clarify, will there be a general debate after the amendment, or the general debate now?
I think if we could have the general debate on the paper that's not the amendment now, I'm not going to say that no one can mention anything afterwards, but if we could have general debate on the paper prior to the amendment, and then we'll discuss the amendment.
First of all, thank you to Tom and to others involved in this. I fully want to place on record my support for using the adult social care reserve in the way that's suggested. We're not in a great position in relation to the adult social care reforms, but we're in no more difficult position than the vast number of local authorities across the country. And the meeting that I took place in most recently with all of the local authorities in our region, there was real strong criticism of the government saying it had reformed social care, but not giving us the resources to implement those reforms. 88% of in a survey of directors of adult social services nationally say they haven't got the resources to implement the reforms. This is very much a national issue, not a local issue. We're only really giving a full debate of this at the Adult and Health Committee next week, so I'm not trying to engage in a full debate about this today, but because our decision making requires this committee to make a decision on the use of the reserve, I'm more than happy in advance of that to say that whatever our view about the politics of it and the government removing the revenue that it wanted to raise, we never agreed to that in the first place, but then not giving us assurances about how money would be found is what the Local Government Association calls a perilous state. Nevertheless, we are incumbent on implementing what we're required to, which includes coming up with a so-called fair cost of care in Cambridgeshire by next month, by October. And so we just can't sit around and wait for the government to provide resources. And therefore it is very, very sensible that the decision is taken today about use of the adult care reserve. And this is the second Friday in a row where major financial decisions are made, but it's good to see that our ones are backed up by the figures.
Thank you, Richard. I don't see any more questions Sorry, Stephen.
Chair, I just wanted to make a general comment to members of the committee that might be helpful just in terms of both this meeting, but actually in advance of the update on business planning at the next meeting of strategy and resources. As members may be aware, I've just been on a period of annual leave, and as you do as a chief executive, you spend quite a bit of time reading. I cheered myself up intensely by reading two recent reports that have been published. One around learnings from those local authorities that have issued statutory section 114 notices, essentially have got themselves into major financial difficulty. The other around a summary of the learnings from councils that have had public interest reports published by Grant Thornton. And actually, one of the key recommendations from Grant Thornton is something I thought might be useful for the committee to hear this afternoon, and indeed is probably something for us to consider when we have the update on business planning at the next meeting of this committee. So one of their key recommendations is that councils need to ensure they are mindful of the reserve levels at all times and ensure there is a clear strategy for maintaining adequate reserves. In their view, this needs to be at least 5% of net general fund expenditure, flexed upwards to consider the macroeconomic and local risks the council faces. Members, you've already heard from the Section 151 officer that clearly we have some macroeconomic and local risk issues. So I guess my comment today is just to remind you about the importance of both allocated and unallocated reserves being maintained at an adequate level. That plays through into the monitoring report today, as contained, I think, in Appendix 4, but importantly forms part of your discussion on business planning at the next meeting of the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Stephen, I would like to say that I think you need to think about your holiday reading. Are there any further comments? Edna.
Thank you very much. Yes, if I could just sort of ask a little bit for a bit of expert view here. I mean, these papers were put together before the last week's events, and I just wonder what the impact, we talked about cost of borrowing, but what about the inflation on the cost of, services and so on that we procure? Are we looking to, is that going to affect our overspend overall?
Tommy, happy to come.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the current year, we have factored in those inflationary pressures where we're aware of them. The situation's moving quite fast, and in the current year there are some part year effects. Because of the recent announcements on the energy price cap per unit for businesses, that may have an in-year upside for the council. Still looking at that because it doesn't cover the full cost of energy, but on that wholesale price there may be some upside there. The service committees in the October cycle are all about to receive an update for each of their respective areas on inflation, and it's a really significant budget pressure. I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying we started the year with an £18 million budget gap for April 2023, the year beginning then, and we've seen that gap double just due to inflation, which is just astonishing, really. And it is across workforce, energy prices, fuel related, construction related expenditure, and care costs. So a wide range of the factors facing the council. Just on treasury management, again in year, because of previous borrowing the council's undertaken, we don't have immediate exposure. We don't need to borrow in the next few months, and actually our cash flow position locally has been very healthy. We've seen a kind of decline in the overall borrowing, so we may see some upside there. But we will need to refinance a significant amount of our debt over the next 15 to 18 months. And were we to see this level of borrowing rates from PWLB, and they relate to gilts, persist, again, we're looking at potentially I'd hesitate to put a figure on it, but £2 million plus adjustment to our costs next year. We're working that through, and we'll bring a more detailed estimate through to the October and December committee cycle, hopefully once the position is stabilised and we've had more opportunity to take advice from the Treasury advisors.
Thank you. Helpful and worrying. Okay. I think we will now move on to the amendment. So Councillor Bowden, would you like to put your amendment?
Thank you, Chair. Back in March and April, the government announced almost £7 billion of grants towards local bus and transport schemes around the country. That's England outside Greater London, which has got Transport for London. And just looking at the government website, just under 2/3 of England's population outside London benefited from that new investment. Unfortunately, our area wasn't one of those areas. In fact, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is the only mayoral combined authority in the country to have received nothing. And just comparing that, for example, with a very similar sized combined authority area, the west of England, they received just over £650 million, just over 110 million in revenue and 540 million in capital. We received nothing. We were told that the application put in by the mayor of the combined authority for grants was insufficiently ambitious. And so we knew 6 months ago when this announcement took place that we were going to be facing some problems as far as our bus services were concerned. But we thought at that time that those problems were going to be in March and April next year and beyond. What we hadn't taken into account was the scandalous actions by Stagecoach. And I say scandalous because earlier this month they accepted money from government called the Bus Service Operators Grant. And that was to cover the rest of this financial year. And again, going to the gov.uk website, the Bus Service Operators Grant is aimed to benefit passengers by enabling operators to run services that might otherwise be unprofitable and could lead to cancellation. So that was the purpose of the grant. They accepted that grant. At the same time, they announced that they were going to axe 18 routes and reduce services on another 13 routes on the grounds that they were unprofitable. And their rationale behind accepting the grant, but at the same time cutting the unprofitable routes, was they were maintaining or almost maintaining the level of bus service provided in Cambridgeshire as a whole, because they were increasing bus services or will be increasing bus services at the same time in Cambridge City primarily, and to a lesser extent in the areas just outside Cambridge City. Now, I have to say that I have written to the members of Parliament for the most affected districts, Huntingdonshire, Fenland and East Cambridgeshire, asking them to take this up with the Department for Transport, because quite clearly what Stagecoach has done has not been in the spirit of the regulations. And it really is outrageous that they have acted in the way they have, taking the minimum amount of legal time necessary to give notice to residents of their intentions. Now, this has, as I say, particularly affected the rural areas of Fenland, Huntingdonshire and East Cambridgeshire, areas which already had the worst public transport available. And the impact of these changes, which are due to come into force at the end of next month, will be severe and in many cases will be devastating for, and I'm not making this number up, for thousands of Cambridgeshire residents. There are students who will not know how they're going to be getting to their school or college. There are people who won't know how they're going to get to or from their jobs, or to get to medical appointments, or to the shops, or to other services. The impact this has on so many people across our county, but as I say, particularly in the more rural parts of our county, the impact is absolutely immense. Now, the Mayor Johnson has managed to get together £1.7 million of revenue from his budgets to try to cover some of these cuts in services. But the 1.7 million won't be anywhere near enough to be able to manage to get short-term contracts in place to be able to cover these cuts of services up to the end of March next year. Now, what's all this got to do with Cambridgeshire County Council, some of you may be asking? And legally, of course, nothing, because the responsibility for bus services passed over a bit of time ago from the county council to the combined authority. But practically, we have to realize that the lives of so many of our residents, so many thousands of them, and particularly so many thousands of those who are more deprived residents, will be affected, affecting them, affecting their health, affecting their welfare, affecting their livelihoods. And that places a moral obligation upon us, if we are able to help if we can. And the point is that we can, because we do have resources to be able to do it. And we've got a specific resource which relates to this, which is the post-pandemic recovery reserve. So there are monies which are available for us to do this. And the request that I'm making is that we match the £1.7 million that the Mayor has managed to find, so that there is a much larger pot, potentially also with money from the Greater Cambridge Partnership, in order to ensure that the quite costly exercise that there's going to be over the next few weeks of trying to secure short-term service provision in these 31 services up to the end of March is able to be met in full. And what I'm asking members to do, Chair, is to put party politics to one side and to put the interests of our residents first, and to support this amendment, and to ensure that we buy ourselves, or rather, we buy the Mayor and the combined authority, the breathing time necessary to get a longer term, more sustainable resolution in place from April onwards. I spoke to the Mayor about this yesterday afternoon. He is trying the best that he's able to do with in the circumstances he's now found himself in, with the amount of money that he's got available. If he'd had the revenue money that other combined authorities managed to get, he'd have 100 times the amount of money that he's got to be able to address this issue, more than address this issue. But unfortunately, that application he made was deemed to be insufficiently ambitious. So now I'm asking the county council to step in where we don't have a legal obligation to, but where there is this moral obligation to ensure that we don't find ourselves in significant areas within the county council area of having effectively bus and public transport deserts, where individuals have not just poor local services, but in many cases, none at all. And that cannot be in accordance with many of the policies that this council has pushed forward for so long. So that's my request. Thank you very much indeed, Chair.
Thank you for your amendment. Do you have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Goldsack. So we're now coming to discussion on the amendment. Are there any people who would like to speak now? And Stephen, I think maybe you can start us off with a bit of a discussion about where we are with the bus process. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, just for the benefit of members of the committee, I've spoken to the combined authority to make sure we have the most up-to-date position on the timeline and their actions, much as Councillor Borden's referenced in his conversation with the Mayor. As members will be aware, Stagecoach announced the withdrawal of 18 services on the 20th of September. On the 21st of September, the Mayor signed a mayoral decision notice to authorise a process of retendering for those services. That process began immediately and will run until the 6th of October. The combined authority, as Councillor Borden's referenced, has identified £1.7 million worth of funding that can be used to support as many of the withdrawn services as possible between the end of October and the end of March. I understand that funding comes from a combination of underspends on concessionary fares and £500,000 worth of the bus recovery grant. The outcome of the retendering process, which is clearly a key part of the timescale for consideration, will be reported to the Combined Authority Board on the 19th of October, I understand, for decisions to be taken on which withdrawn routes can be supported and maintained between the end of October and the end of March. I'm advised by officers from the Combined Authority that the initial response from operators to the retendering process has been positive so far. At the same time as that retendering work is underway, the Combined Authority is undertaking work to refresh a bus strategy for the whole of the county, including Peterborough, and that will obviously feed into a refreshed bus service improvement plan submission to government before the end of the year. As you would anticipate, the combined authority, as the statutory body responsible for this funding and for transport within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, are also lobbying extremely hard with government to secure additional monies. Chair, if I may, that's probably the update in terms of the combined authority position. If members will oblige me for a few moments longer, I have a couple of comments to make about Stagecoach as well, if you wouldn't mind. Clearly, we work with Stagecoach as one of a number of operators, and I, along with a number of senior officers and members from local authorities across the county, met with Stagecoach's managing director and some of his senior staff recently at their request to outline some of the changes they wanted to take forward to the bus service network, and clearly they were engaging directly with the combined authority. I guess, Chair, the reason I wanted to comment on this is not clearly from a political point, but from an officer point of view. I just wanted to comment and make public the statements that I made to the managing director of Stagecoach within that session. First of all, I think it's fair to say that the approach being taken by Stagecoach to the provision of services to this county, and frankly across the east of England, because it's not just us that are being affected, versus their overall group position, is probably at best hypocritical. Instead of closing the inequality gap, they're widening it. And at the same time, they've posted preliminary results this financial year, or sorry, at the end of April, of over £72 million as a group. I have to say, I find that position of having comment from their group functions and group chief executives saying they're in a good financial position, they're recovering well with good customer demand, and that they continue to espouse good value public transport services while helping their customers shift from car use to bus use, somewhat contradictory to say the least with the actions they're taking across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Needless to say, those points were all expressed forcefully and quite clearly to the managing director of Stagecoach East and to the regional director of Stagecoach, who attended those sessions and has a broader remit. I just thought it was important to put those public comments out as well, given that your officers from the County Council have been making those views clear to one of our key operators within the county. So that's a factual clarification, if I may, Chair, but clearly, from a combined authority perspective, we don't know as yet what the retendering exercise will deliver. We don't understand what the cost proposals will look like from that. So I thought that timescale and the discussion by their board on the 19th of October was important for your debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that update. Okay, so open for debate on the amendment. Who would like to go first? I can't believe no one wants to comment on this. Go on, Edna. Yeah, I mean, I don't have sort of huge lengthy points to make. I think we're all feeling the same way about Stagecoach's actions, and I welcome the comments made by the chief executive. My personal feeling is that they've behaved appallingly. That, you know, this is a shift of public funds to private sector in a kind of unfair, almost gouging way, and it's not a partnership approach. It is unwelcome, and there are many disadvantages to it. However, we really are interested in ensuring that there are bus routes available because it is critical. So I've got a lot of sympathy for the amendment. I think the fundamental problem I've got with it is I think it's just not the right time to be talking about extra funding that we're putting forward when there's a process underway of procuring these services. And that just has to play out, and we have to see what it is that is proposed. And we won't know, as the chief executive says, that's unknown until the bids are in. So I would see that this as being really an unhelpful and sort of confusing, undermining signal to private sector providers who might want to be involved in this bid. Thank you. Richard.
Yeah, just briefly, because I echo what Edna has said. I think we should take the Conservative amendment in the spirit it was meant, which is a protest against the the bus cuts. But I hope we won't around this table have some form of competition of who's most against the bus cuts. We should all be against the bus cuts. They're atrocious for this county and for the people that live here. And I hope that we're not going to get into a blame game. We've heard some criticism of the combined authority. I think that's not right. This is a government system of privatised bus provision. It's the government that has given a grant to Stagecoach with no strings attached. And by not funding the combined authority in the way that they should do, the suggestion is that we might have to double fund the bus provision from our own budgets here in the county council. All of that is unsatisfactory. But rather than have a political disagreement between the groups in this council, I think we should focus our combined criticism of Stagecoach itself, who have behaved appallingly. They have been hypocritical, and they've abused what appears to me to be a quasi-monopoly position in Cambridgeshire in a way that I think needs to be broken up. I hope the Conservatives will withdraw the amendment. It stands there. It's been properly debated there. Their intentions are clear. But I think it is right that we wait and see the tendering process. We make sure that we get the services we want as far as possible, but that we minimise the call on the Cambridgeshire Council taxpayer by not in advance setting out amounts of money. And I hope the Conservatives will understand that, understand the spirit in which it's said, and may choose to withdraw the amendment.
Thank you. Any further, Lorna?
Thank you. I think we all share around this table the utter shock at the actions of Stagecoach, which are reprehensible, and also the deep concern and worry of our residents about how they're going to get to work, how their children are going to get to education and training, how they're going to access medical facilities, leisure opportunities, retail, all of the things that are part of a normal life, and for many people will be absolutely thrown to the winds as a result of what Stagecoach have done. It's also incredibly bad news for our ambitions for climate change and for carbon emissions, because it's going to throw people out of public transport and into their cars, and that's the last thing we need. So it's really, really bad news. So why are we here? We're here because of the deregulation of the mid-1980s, which basically broke up the attempt to coordinate provision of public transport and allowed private providers to compete for the profitable routes, leaving the local authorities to pick up what was left over, the crumbs from the table, the expensive parts, to make sure that there was a network and not just a few profitable routes for the private sector. We're here also because of the refusal of the government to fund the bid for improvement to local public transport services, as we've heard. We were far from alone in that. Many authorities found themselves left high and dry without support for their funding bids, and that is a statement of fact. And we're also here because of the way in which the government just handed out this money to bus companies without making it an absolute requirement to continue to run the routes that they have been receiving this money for, and that is absolute dereliction of duty. So what are the solutions? In the long term, there has to be long-term reliable investment in public transport. And I think there has been a strong case made on social media and by various interest groups that should include light rail, tram systems, all of the things where you put rail in the ground, you put stations up, you go, look, we're not messing. You know, and that has to come, I think, eventually. That we're not there yet. And even if we started today, that wouldn't be in place for years to come. In the medium term, we need the government to look again at the whole public transport structures and how they work, and give us the powers that we need and the resources that we need to be able to run a network that is reliable in the longer term. We need, I think, locally collaboration across the tiers, the many tiers, perhaps the too many tiers of local government in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. We need those various organisations to be pooling ideas, pooling resources, and pulling together whatever they can. We need, I think, to make sure that there is some version of the Greater Cambridge Partnership City Access proposals that is capable of providing, and perhaps is now the only thing that is capable at the moment of providing a coordinated network, a better service for people, and the resources to make franchising a possibility. And I think we also need to be looking at new models of public transport provision and looking at things like community transport and how that can better plug some of the gaps, and also look at new routes. Perhaps what's in place at the moment isn't the best way of getting people around Cambridgeshire, and perhaps we should be more ambitious than simply trying to plug a hole. And in the short term, I think we need to be asking the government for bus support directly to come to us, not to Stagecoach. We have a transport minister who is a Cambridgeshire member of Parliament. I would hope to be hearing from her that that is what she is asking for and prioritising. And I think, as others have said, that we also need to see how the procurement process that has been put in place by the Public Transport Authority for this area, how that plays out. And it may well be that that's insufficient, in which case it may well be the case that other partners will need to consider what they do and how we respond to that. But I don't think that cavalierly marching in to an existing ongoing procurement process is the best way of addressing this in the short term. And I do think we need to allow that process to reach its conclusion and see where we get at that point and where we need to go next. But I absolutely agree that what we are left with is intolerable and something radical has to be done about it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sharp and then Councillor Hoy.
Thank you, Chair. Where do I start on this? I've heard what members opposite are saying. The Combined Authority, the Mayor produced a bus improvement plan about a year ago to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee of the Combined Authority, which I sit on. It just wasn't worth the paper it was written on. Opposite are saying now that that plan's being refreshed. It's like shutting the stable door after the horse had bolted. In fact, the horse is actually in the saddling enclosure, having run the race. That's how far it's behind. But if I look at what effect it is, and I agree wholeheartedly, Stagecoach have actually what they've done is absolutely diabolical, to be quite honest. And I think that's one thing we would all agree on this afternoon, that they haven't covered themselves in any glory by this. But my division has the numbers 11 and 12 going through it. All those buses go to Newmarket, which I know is in Suffolk, but all of my villages to the south of Newmarket rely upon that for their services. Yes, we've got Dullingham Rail, which is in my division. But then if I move to the west of my division, Bottisham, Lode and Swaffham Baalbek will be basically cut off with no bus services. I'm going to declare I'm co-chair of governors at Bottisham Village College. We've got 15 families who come from Fen Ditton who are out of catchment, who rely upon the bus to get to school and to get to the college. So that's how bad it is. And we've got an open evening for year 7 pupils next Thursday evening. So it'll be interesting to see if there's a downturn of those, because they're going to struggle to get to work and to college, sorry, because some of them haven't got a car option. As mentioned, I think it was Councillor Dupre mentioned some could get in the cars and that would increase pollution. I would agree. it would increase pollution, but we've got some families who haven't even got that option, sadly. I was at Newmarket Town Council on Monday evening when there were about 140 members of the public. There weren't some of people from Barnwell and Bottisham there, some in my ward, others in other councillors' wards, and obviously some people from Suffolk, but it was a very angry meeting. And I know, chatting to a senior person from Long Road College, there are issues there. They've got students already actually looking at moving away from that college because they can't get there, which is obviously a sad situation. I understand, I mean, well, we had a seminar on Monday evening, East Camden's district councillors, and the GCP said they've got 50 million allocated for future years for bus provision. So this is a drop in the ocean of this, because if we let these services go, then I'm not sure how they're going to get their service that they envisage. The 11s and 12 bus routes are up to 97% of pre-COVID traffic. So it's not that they're low, and they're like, I'm sure, like a lot of bus services around the county, very busy in the mornings and in the evenings. In fact, they're, sometimes I think impossible to get on at times. People are having to change their times to get on the buses. Obviously, they run pretty empty during the day, and that's maybe something Stagecoach, as the operator or whoever comes in, should be looking at. But I know it's difficult. I know Suffolk County Council, for example, speaking to colleagues on the other side of the border, are trying to get one of those routes with another operator. So they are working on that. So that's great. But I just don't feel we can. I understand what the chief executive is saying, that we will know by the 19th of October, but that is less than 2 weeks before the cuts are due to happen. And I just don't think we can run it to that tight. I think we've got to do something today. And if everything comes out in the wash, then we get all of those routes reused, then great. But I do think we've got to go for this because we didn't get the bus money. I find it's not a blame culture, but I find it we're blaming the 1980s now. We're 40 years since then. So, we need to be making decisions now, not blaming 40 years ago. But I would hope, I'm guessing from what members are saying, they're not going to support this amendment, but I would certainly hope they would. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Sam.
Thank you. I was going to say similar to what Councillor Sharp had said. I've heard it all now. Don't blame Dr. Nick, blame Mrs. Thatcher. I won't go too much on a history lesson, particularly since I can't remember the Thatcher era, given I was, I think, 3 at the end of it. But there we are. So I don't think anyone is actually playing the blame game. In fact, Councillor Bowden, in his opening remarks, actually was very complimentary about Dr. Nick, perhaps less complimentary than I may have been myself, but he was very complimentary and did not try and apportion any blame. I don't think anyone has made any blame this side, except for perhaps of Stagecoach, which we all have said many things as to why we think they are the bad guys. And I also agree with that as well. However, obviously, there was some pretty negative remarks made from Councillor Howitt and others, and that's disappointing, not unexpected, but disappointing. The main thing I really wanted to say that is the argument that it's too soon is just incorrect. We have to step in now. The tender process will not succeed if we just leave it. The mayor's 1.7 million is not enough. We know that. The only way to save the services after the 30th of October is to increase the amount of money that the mayor has and put our money in with it. Obviously, we're not going to do that today. It seems very clear. It's very sad to me because, again, this is a bit of a deja vu, really, because the last time I was in this very room was again talking about buses. And again, it was a lot of empty words, promises that weren't made, weren't kept. As they say, talk is cheap. We often hear, and I've said this many times, I said it at council, I'm going to keep saying it probably for the remainder of this term. We often hear, we want to stop climate change, we want to help the vulnerable, we want to do X, Y, Z thing. And then when it comes to putting your money where your mouth is, it just doesn't happen. And it's just so frustrating. It doesn't affect my area. We don't have any routes covered by this, but obviously it does affect a lot of people in the wider county. And I can see if I was really reliant on that service, how much I'd be desperate for any help they can get, because people do really rely on these services, really, really badly rely on them.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we seem to, at the moment in this country, be in a sort of very strange relationship sometimes between business and government, where when things are going swimmingly, businesses carry on paying out dividends to shareholders and nothing happens. And then when it's trouble, come to the government to for money to sort of bail them out. And that asymmetry just never delivers value for money for the citizens. I think the real villain in this, as we've talked about, is Stagecoach. As Councillor Hoy said, we haven't played the blame game in any other way unanimously about other than to Stagecoach, who have really behaved appallingly here and have cut services which will affect one of the villages in my division. But there are lessons, I think, in this as to how to protect ourselves in the future. And as Councillor Bowden said, the worst, most egregious part of this is a company which takes money for preservation of services and then turns around and does something exactly the opposite. And the lesson out of that is, don't give them money unless it's very clear what you get in return. That's the lesson. If we approach this with a money first approach, we're going to get more of the same. And it seems to me that the approach of the tendering has a lot of merit, because it does actually tie explicitly what you get to what you pay for. And we should let that process run and not dangle money without clarity as about what we're getting in return for it. So I've got huge amounts of sympathy with where this amendment is directing, but actually the process, I think, is not one which I can see working in the favour of our taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not without sympathy. I can see entirely what Councillor Bowden, colleagues across the aisle are trying to achieve. I think we all accept Stagecoach have behaved pretty badly, taking government subsidy, funding from central government, and then withdrawing the service. I think we need a lot more clarity on this. I mean, we've got 2.5 lines. I'm looking at the first bullet point, which we're talking about. I mean, where would this money go? Who would receive it? Would this go to the combined authority? Would it go towards another bus operator? I think it's quite vague, and I hope Councillor Bowden can clarify for us. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Steve Cornell and then Elisa, I think.
Thank you, Chair. I think, I'm not going to regale you all with stories of people that this is going to affect, because we all know that. I think that's I think equally, every one of us around this, this table, we all know that occasionally we have to do things we don't like. Sometimes we have to pay for things that we don't really want to pay for. It doesn't sit well. Planning is a very good good example. So you have to pass things sometimes that you don't sit well, but here we go. So I'm going to liken it to that. This is definitely one of those things. It doesn't sit well, but I think we're going to be delusional to ourselves if we think that when this goes out to to other companies, it's not going to cost the same sort of money. I think we have to face reality here. It's going to cost, and it doesn't sit well with me at all. I completely agree with what you've just said. But I think the difference we've got now is we're talking now. We could do something. We can set the parameters. We can set the rules to this, where it goes, and make make that difference by the combined authority, the 12 months that we're looking at, to actually get something through that will that will work. We've got to think outside. Most of us sit here on various panels within the combined authority. We're all members. The buck stops with us. So let's do something. And then at the same time, doing this and paying this money, personally, to me, doesn't sit well, as I've said. But neither does saying to somebody in the street, "I'm not going to do anything." That doesn't sit very well either. That's how I feel. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa.
Shall I just say a couple of things? First of all, I do hope our colleagues in Tees Valley and South Yorkshire aren't listening, because if they are, they'd be surprised to think that their combined authorities don't exist. There are 9 combined authorities in the country. 3 of them did not get their BSIBs financed. We were one of them. I would accept this is an innocent mistake, but yes. Sorry, it's not
Just a
of
point
me.
of personal clarification, because clearly it's being suggested that I didn't tell the truth in what I said previously. What I said was that almost £7 billion of government money was made available to England outside Greater London in March and April, and that of the mayoral combined authorities, we were the only ones not to receive any of that. And Tees Valley, for example, received £310 million of sustainable transport settlements as part of that £7 billion. They received 3.779 million of revenue. The other one you mentioned was North of Tyne, was it? Or was it sorry? South Yorkshire. South Yorkshire received £570 million in those announcements of sustainable transport settlements for capital, and £5.375 million of revenue support. So what I said was true, and I would like that to be noted. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for the clarification, Elisa.
Fine, we'll leave it at that.
It's not funny, Chris.
It really isn't. It really isn't funny. Anyway, we are not in a good position at all. This is really rather difficult. And would it that somebody had a plan to take those bus services and put them in the control of somebody who actually cares? I will leave that at that as well. I would only like to make one point. I mean, I actually am rather pleased in a way of how the discussion has gone, because I think there has been an expression of rather good intention from everybody, and I will take that, because we all care about the fact that these buses are so vital to so many people. One note on process: we will have a meeting of this committee on the 20th of October. This is the day after the combined authority actually comes out with the results of the tendering process. So by that point, we will know the financial ask. So that will be the point for us to make a financial decision, should one be required. In terms of why we are having to be extremely cautious about raiding any of our general reserves, which I have seen called in the press, in social media, when this amendment was put out, you know, an unring-fenced account, a pandemic recovery account. No, we don't have any of that. We have our general reserves, which we already are not keeping at the recommended level following the recent shocks that the markets have had to endure. That is work that will need to take place, but we would be in a position to be a little bit less cautious with what we do with our general reserves, were we not in the most appalling chaos, because it's apparently possible. I didn't think, you know, budgets, we've had spring budgets and autumn budgets. This wasn't a budget. Yes, I don't recall anything else that had the impact on our financial security that this event did. So if anyone's placing the blame anywhere, that's where it lies. And as I said, we will have the opportunity to make financial decisions about what we do with our buses until March, when the tendering process is finished. We will work with the combined authority and other partners to make sure that we take the right approach and we save those routes, because by God, we want to save them. Nobody has not been directly touched by this. I have a friend who's literally, she's not slept for a week because she's dependent on the bus to get to work. She'll lose that job if that bus disappears. So, you know, it's not a joke. And can we please try and do this in the right, responsible way? Because in addition to all of the lives of these people, the financial solvency of this council is also at stake. So I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gonsack, and then we'll move.
Yeah, I thought I'd come back as I was the seconder to the motion. Right. I've got a pre-written speech which I'm going to give, but then I would like to raise a couple of points that's been raised in the room. What we have today is a straight and honest attempt to put our residents first, the residents of Cambridgeshire, foremost in a decision that we can make, not one that we're going to blame central government for, not one elsewhere. This is putting Cambridgeshire residents first. What we present today in this amendment is an attempt to address a relatively simple, straightforward problem, but it's got multiple impacts. I want to highlight some of these multiple impacts because I think they're getting lost. Social isolation is one of the COSMIC committee's focus areas. There are high post-pandemic restriction issues where people have still got issues, especially for the aged, vulnerable and deprived. Bus travel is their only method in many cases, and the losses of these routes will likely compound the fears, doubts, and raising the anxiety levels of those, worsening a social isolation issue. Local community economy. This is struggling to emerge from the pandemic restrictions, but many businesses are working damned hard to do so. In towns like my own, Soham and Chatteris, I know that locals use the through bus to access the town centre. So they come from the Newmarket end of Soham, they come from the Ely end of Soham, and they alight the bus at near their homes, and they get off in the town centre. Guess what they do in the town centre? They support local businesses. They spend money in the cafes. They support the co-op. They go into the local shops. Other shops are available, by the way, when I said the co-op, but they support the local. So the local economy of these towns affected by these bus routes is really going to struggle. The voluntary sector that supports transportation could possibly step in sporadically and help with trips to the doctors. But my day job is the CEO of such enterprise covering East Cambridgeshire. I can tell you it's not a cheap taxi nor a bus replacement service. It is the service that has evolved because of the reduction in suitable public transport over the years. That's why it's there. It may be able to help people get to hospital appointments, dental appointments and doctors, but we can't rely on that. And finally today, we have the commercial operation of the bus company. I'm going to give you an example. Why would a seller of sandwiches in a high street encourage a customer to go to the next door cafe and sit down and have something to eat? They wouldn't. They literally wouldn't. So why would Stagecoach take their passengers to an alternative alternative travel supplier such as a railway station? They won't. In Soham, we're very proud of the new railway station. It's been well used. The Combined Authority and Cambridgeshire County Council ran a full consultation exercise to the members of the public for revised routes to link the bus route to the station. Guess what? Shelved. Post-consultation, post-spend, post-everything. So I've got no active travel transport. That's what this was, an active travel pot, because Stagecoach wouldn't take a bus to the station, to the rail station. So I joined the cheers or the jeers for Stagecoach. So using these funds, I'm going to relate to something that's been said today. What I've learned today from the chief executive and speakers opposite is that the retendering exercise is going out and a close next Friday on the 6th. A decision by the 19th. We've got a meeting on the 20th. The buses stop on the 31st of October, right? What we're asking you to do today is go to these companies and say, these routes, how much do they cost? And then empower the mayor with 1.7 plus 1.7 and hopefully 1.7, which to my maths is 5.1 million pounds of money to get us through to March. Between now and March, all the members that spoke opposite mentioned we need more time and to react. That's when we react. Post this decision, then. If we wait till then, it's too late. You will not get these. Soham and Chatteris will be dead on its feet. Towns in Huntingdonshire will be dead on its feet. Sutton won't have a bus service going through it. Other places will not have adequate bus service. This is what we're asking you to do today. Colleagues have mentioned the blaming of this on a lady that's been dead a few years now from 40 years ago. That's quite farcical. We came into this with a very honest and very open approach to ideas. I totally respect Councillor Machini's comments about the fact there's a consolidated fund that holds your reserves. Totally get that. That's not a problem. What I'm saying is this is for the residents of our county. And a vote today to say no, thank you, will let Councillor Nick Johnson and his team, by the way, let me just add a point here. The current level of employment in seats in officers at Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority is circa 50%. That's how many officers they've got to work on this in 9 days. What I'm saying is just make the pot bigger, because if you're not, to me, I'm going to give you an analogy. The school's on fire. Don't worry, one fire engine is there, but I can get 2 more. Let's not worry about that. Let's let the one do and see how it does, and then we'll pull the other 2 in to see where it goes from there. We'll wait down the line. Oh dear, the building's burnt. We've got to rebuild it. Think about the costs I've just outlined on social deprivation. Think about the costs on social isolation. Think about the impact on Cambridgeshire County Council's hubs and funds that are going to be given out this winter for people that are suffering these. We just need to think again. And I implore you opposite. You know, we came to this today, non-political. We came to this today for the residents of Cambridgeshire. Look, there may well have been a shout that it was our idea, but for goodness sake, it's for the good of our residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I've just got a couple of things to say before we move to the vote on the amendment, and then we'll move to the vote on the rest of the recommendations. So first of all, thank you for what has been a good debate, and I agree fully with Councillor Bowden, with our Chief Executive, and with all the councillors who have said that the behaviour of Stagecoach has been truly appalling. There are many families in my area, as in many other areas, who are extremely worried about how they're going to get to work or their children get to school, despite some implications on Twitter that this doesn't affect my patch. It absolutely does. And I also think that there has been a massive failure by government in allowing this position to take place, that actually they handed the money over to Stagecoach without sufficient strings, and we need to make sure that that does not happen again. And it's good to hear that Councillor Bowden has written to MPs expressing his concern. On the BSIP process and the failure of the Combined Authorities BSIP bid, I do know that there was a huge amount of anger among many councillors, including many Conservative-run councils, about the BSIP process, and the level of fury at the CCN meetings over how that money had handed out was quite notable. As so often, government asked for bids and then explained after the bids had gone in how the distribution of that money had been handed out, and that is no way to manage investment and no way to treat councils who are applying for funds. And we do urgently need a much more coherent approach to public transport, and especially bus strategy and public transport subsidy from this government. As has been made clear by a number of speakers, we don't yet know the cost of preserving the bus services, or what other sources of funding might be available to support these crucial services. I'm absolutely not ruling out that the County Council may need to help, but I am clear that in the first place, we should look for more funding to come from central government and from the second tranche of that money, which is due to be handed over to bus companies. I think it's completely crucial that that money needs to come to the Combined Authority if it can. My understanding is that there's a second tranche due in December. If I'm wrong about that, I'm happy to be told that I'm wrong. But if there is, then that needs to be coming to the Combined Authority and not go directly to Stagecoach. The amendment asks for a very specific amount to be taken out of our reserves before we know what level of funding is needed. And as Elisa makes clear, we have another meeting on the day after the tender results, where if needed, we can review whether additional support is necessary for the bus services. So for that reason, I would like to ask that we do not support the amendment today. But I am keen that we take away from this debate a united vision that we all agree on the key importance of our bus services and the need for a long-term reliable public transport system for our area. And it's good to know that there is absolute unanimity in this room about just how important bus services are. So if we can now move to a vote on the amendment.
Have a point of order, please. May I ask for a recorded vote, please?
Absolutely. All those in favour of the amendment, if you could raise your, do you need to have?
I'll read your names and please answer yes or no. Councillor Bowden.
Yes.
Councillor Ambrose Smith,
Yes.
Councillor Costello. Councillor Goldsack,
Yes.
Councillor Hoy, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Corney, Councillor Dupre, Councillor Goff, Councillor Murphy, Councillor Nessinger,
No.
Councillor Wilson,
No.
Councillor Howard,
No.
Councillor Moschini,
No.
and Councillor Sanderson.
No.
Chair, the result of the vote is 7 votes in favour, 7 against. The amendment is lost.
Thank you.
That wrong? It's 7 votes in favour, 8 votes against. The amendment is therefore lost. My apologies.
Thank you very much, Michelle. If we could now move to the other recommendations. I didn't hear anybody speak against these, so I'm anticipating that we can take them as a block. I'll just read these out again, as it's sometimes as they were discussed. So recommendation A is that we authorise up to 790,000 to be drawn down from the Adults Risk Reserve with the agreement of the Chief Finance Officer and in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of this committee to fund the first stage of implementation of the Adult Social Care Reform as set out in section 3.2. That we approve additional prudential borrowing requests totaling 3.765 million and environment of 0.4 million as per table 4.5.2, and to note the Corporate Services Finance and Monitoring Report in Appendix B. So all those in favour of those recommendations, if you could indicate now, please. I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the Highways Asset Management System replacement. And I will hand over to Sue and John Monslow for this item. Thank you. And I think after this item, we'll take a short break as it will be getting close to our 2 hours.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. This asset management replacement proposal, it presents the proposed approach to the procurement of the asset management system to replace the now outdated Insight system. The procurement of the new system will enable the highway service to meet the needs of our members, residents, partners, contractors, and the service itself more effectively. For the efficient and effective management of the highway service and all its various interactions, it's essential that we have a system that's able to manage a broad range of data and information. The Insight system no longer provides the required functionality or capability to meet our service needs. This is creating inefficiencies and difficulties for the highway service in operating services effectively, and it also prevents the service providing helpful, effective and timely information to members, partners and customers. The proposal presented is to go out to tender next month and procure a supplier of a cloud-hosted system by January 23. The implementation of that system would run through in a phased approach from April 2023 to April 2024. The needs of the specification of this system has been developed to take on the needs of the many, and to establish what those needs were, we've run through a number of different actions which are detailed within the report in section 3.4 and 3.5. This has included a member workshop for the members of Highways and Transport Committee, which was held on the 21st of July. And the process, the feedback from that process and all the others listed has been used to develop the specification which is presented in Appendix 1. We did send out a revised Appendix 1 following the H&T committee to be filled in, to feed back in some of those comments that were received. We've also included an indicative cost within section 4.5 of the report, but it should be noted that that is only indicative from the market of information that we have available at the moment, and obviously we'll be better informed once we go through that procurement process. And that's really the presentation of the report, but we're happy to take any clarification questions.
Thank you very much, Sue. I know that this had a good deal of discussion at a previous strategy and resources meeting and has since had a good deal of discussion at the Highways and Transport Committee meeting. But it is obviously an important procurement, a very important procurement. So any questions or debate on this one, Edna?
Yeah, just a quick one. It's obviously been through a lot of scrutiny and it's obviously needed. So just one question, it talks in 1.2, it mentions response to inquiries, relevant and timely information to a number of people, public, town and parish council and member inquiries. Is that going to be, I mean, that's not the IT system that is generating the responses, is it? Because there's self-serve later, but responding to your inquiries sounds like it might be something different. So what's going to provide the answer to the queries?
It's the ability to collect that information about what's happening on the system, to be able to access it in a consistent and quick manner. What it will enable us to do is almost collect live information from the information that's happening on the highways, on the network itself, and feed that into the system immediately. So it means that we have the information both as officers, but also on that self-serve basis for both councillors and for members of the public.
So if I may, can I just clarify, that means that this is, it will partly be self-serve, so that'll be helpful, but then also officers will be able to access information a lot better so they can respond better to queries. Is that the idea?
Yes, that will be the conclusion. That would be the outcome that we achieve, and that'll be officers within the service, but also officers in our customer access service as well, which will be using this system actively.
Good. Let's hope it works. Neil. Oh, sorry. Actually, I've got Alan first and then Neil. Sorry, Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of things. Like to thank, I did attend the workshop of Highways and Transport back in July. And also we have, as it's mentioned in the paper, discussed it in the Highways Improvement Board. I'd like to thank John for the workshop because it was very clear, and Sue obviously for the work that's been done. And I think just to clarify my understanding, which I think will hopefully help Councillor Murphy as well, is my understanding. I think there were three important outcomes from this, for want of a better word, is that the first one, maybe the most important one certainly, is that staff have a modern system that they can mobily enter the data on whilst they're out on site, and that's feeds straight into this software so that there's no rekeying or anything else. Second thing, my understanding is that the public at the moment, I certainly get moans and groans, I don't know if other members do, from members of the public where they've reported a pothole or a street light, and the following day they go back and look at the portal and it's gone. They haven't got a clue whether it's been accepted or whatever. And my understanding, the new system will actually, that they will be able to get feedback from the system of what's happening to their particular query that they've raised. And then the third thing is that us as members, and I think the second thing will also be for what parish councils can get feedback on. And then thirdly, us as members, I certainly get it as well, is that I get queries from people, oh, I reported pothole X a few weeks ago, what's happening? And of course, I'm then having to bother my local highway officer rather than being able to go onto the system and get a report. So I think those are the three benefits that, yeah, and again, I believe it's going to be an off-the-shelf package of it. I think there are about 4 suppliers from what Sue and John have said previously, and we will hopefully use one of those rather than a bespoke package that could cost us a lot more money, certainly in future upgrades. So I'm looking forward to the workshop in December when hopefully we'll have a system that we can approve. But thanks for the work done so far.
Thank you. I'll come to Neil next and then back if necessary.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, this paper was a big step forward from what we saw last time. I think members will remember the discussion we had last time with the Chief Executive about the importance of adopt, not adapt, in terms of these systems. I've just lost I was just a bit concerned when I looked at 3.7 in the paper, which is about trying to ensure that potential suppliers shape and configure their systems to achieve best fit for us, which didn't seem to quite capture that adopt versus adapt kind of spirit. And I hope the adopt versus adapt spirit will actually carry over into the procurement here. So that was one point. And secondly, I'm sure that as well, that we also want to make sure that the governance is in place around the implementation of this system to make sure that any change requests are minimized and are signed off by the sort of IT specialists in this area, so that we kind of maintain as much consistency with that adopt versus adapt approach.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands. I'll just go back to Sue and John. Is there anything you want to respond to, or Stephen, before we move to a vote on this?
I think probably just to confirm and to assure that the adaptation will be what's within the scope of the system that we would be procuring, to make it specific to Cambridgeshire. So whilst this is an off-the-shelf product that will be well tested, there will be specifics that we will want to emphasise within our applications. So it will be within the scope of what that system can deliver, but it's the emphasis that we put on it.
Final word, Mark.
It's a point that's come to me during the debate. The word mobile appears an awful lot in the document, and I totally get that we want our workforce to be mobile enabled and to be able to do everything we can. We cannot afford to disenfranchise those that are not technologically savvy. We're also talking about the aged and the vulnerable. And guess what? These are the people that most often come across issues on our paths. So we cannot, so any solution. Can I have your assurance really that we are going to enable this to make sure that somebody that is walking and sees a problem with a pathway but isn't digitally enabled has as much chance and ease of making it known as somebody who's got a digital camera?
Yes, and the accessibility through the customer access service, where they actually upload reports on behalf of the caller, will still be an important part of our service to ensure that those people who are not able to digitise the upload themselves have the access to the system, much in the same way as they do now.
Thank you very much. I haven't heard anyone speak against this, so we will now move to the recommendations. All those in favour of the recommendations, please show. And that, go on, Michelle, do you want to? So that one is unanimous. Thank you very much. We will have a short break now. I'm going to follow Lorna's advice and say that we're going to restart at 11 minutes past 4. I just want to remind everybody that we've got, sorry, Lorna's advice is that you give people a very specific time that you're restarting, and then they'll be back on time. Then we have quite a large agenda post after the once we go into private session at the end of the meeting. So I'm hoping that we can cover the rest of the public agenda relatively quickly, and then we'll have another short break before we move into the closed session agenda. So we'll restart again at 11 minutes past. I hope that makes sense to everybody. Chris, you're looking very puzzled.
I may have missed something, Chair, but I was only aware of 2 items in exempt session. You said that we've got a large agenda. Have I missed?
They're
some
2
items?
important items. That's the point.
Okay, fine.
Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. I'm confused by the fact that the clocks say different things. So the one on the screen is 2 minutes behind. So we're starting on time by the one on my computer rather than the one up there. Good. The next item on our agenda is item 6, which is the asset management decision update. So Tony Cooper, if you could take us through this one, that would be, and there are 3 different bits to this on there. So thank you.
So, Chair, I'll speak first briefly on the East Barnwell development, which the committee will remember came last to this committee in March. Principal aim of the update in this report is to feedback on positive progress following discussions with the City Council in Cambridge, one of the adjacent landowners, and in essence seek the support of this committee for that collaboration to continue further and put in to action the council's decentralisation approach. What has emerged through those discussions and collaboration is, I think, plans for a better scheme. We have proposals for regeneration of a wider area whilst achieving the county's objectives of re-provision of the library, community and early years provision. The structure of the commercial arrangement on offer is for the City Council's development joint venture to take on the development as a whole, with the council therefore transferring its both its risk and reward from profitability or risk in terms of cost overrun across to that joint venture. The report sets out from section 1.11 onwards the advantages and disadvantages of taking that approach, and we also list some of the community feedback received so far in that section. That's all I'll say in introducing that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we going to Tony for the next one? Or do we want, actually, I'm just wondering whether it's better to take them. I think it probably is better to take them item by item. And I know we've got some other speakers on the East Barnwell item. So are there any questions? First of all, are there any questions to Tom? And Michelle, I'm not quite sure what the process is for. So we invite them to speak next. So Alex, I think that's you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for giving me the opportunity again to express my support for this project in its new form. I'm speaking today on behalf of my residents in Abbey, and it's fair to say there's also agreement and support amongst all councillors in Abbey Ward on this project. I wanted to put my thanks on record for the huge amount of work that has been going into this collaboration between the county and the City Council. In particular, the officers who have been involved from both county and City Council teams, the Think community team that has been engaging with a lot of the stakeholders and residents in Abbey, the consultation team for the several consultation events that have been going on over the summer, and the survey as well, that you can see some of the results in the paper, as well as all the residents who have been involved in those consultations. And I say thank you to my residents because this has been such a long process, and many of the residents have been involved in about 5 or 6 different rounds of consultations on this project since the idea started about 15 years ago, and then it progressed in its various forms. So I really like to thank residents for their patience on this, and also there's some more positivity that finally we are getting on with the job and delivering this project. So in that sense, I thank the joint administration's leadership and all colleagues in the county council for supporting those proposals so far, and of course I encourage you to support this proposal in its form today. Residents are saying, whatever their view on the detail of the project, I think residents are saying no more delays on this. Let's get on with a plan on this. There are of course still some details to be discussed on this, but I think this collaboration between the city and county council gives more confidence to my residents that finally something can be delivered for the benefit of Abbey Ward, which is of course, as all the papers on Abbey mentioned, the most deprived area in Cambridge City and one of the most deprived areas in the county. So it's really important we deliver something for residents in Abbey Ward finally. finally, after those 10 years, at least a decade of discussions. I will end on this point because this speech is not about expressing my views on the project, because I have expressed it many times in several committees on different aspects of the project, whether it's the library, the nursery, or the housing element of it. I'm really pleased that this has been approved by on the city council side when they met on the 22nd of September and had quite a good debate on this. So I think actually now we have regained some of the trust in the process. My residents are seeing that something is happening on East Barnwell. So I think it's really, really important that we maintain that trust going forward, that we are showing that we're responsive and listen to residents in the process. And hopefully the next time I'm speaking again on East Barnwell, I'll speak when the planning application is in place and we can debate more the detail. So I hope you support this today. And I wish to thank you and all your work, both members and officers, on behalf of my residents in Abbey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. So any comments or debate on the East Barnwell proposals? Sam?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to express my frustrations with this project a little bit. I want to make it clear I supported this when it went to CYP. I'm going to support it today. So this is not me sort of declaring I'm going to sort of go against it or anything, but I just wanted to be clear, really, this move was a political choice. Under the previous administration, officers didn't feel the need to move here. The joint administration decided to push this through. Can only speculate, maybe that's because they wanted to shore up votes in Abbey Ward. And I'm not even angry about that. You know, I get it. You're in charge. You can do what you want with the money. That's how it works. That's politics. And perhaps if, you know, when we were in charge, we'd have spent money in our own areas rather than trying to win votes elsewhere. Perhaps we would still be in charge. Who knows? Who knows how these things work out? But I just can't help but notice that the amount of money that this project is now costing us is equivalent to what we've just voted no to on the bus subsidy. So we could have potentially helped to save 31 services, but we've politically chosen to invest in East Barnwell. So I will support it. I'm not going to vote against it, but it would be remiss of me not to mention that fact.
I think it's a slightly surprising comparison, but anyway, anyone else wanting to speak on this item on the East Barnwell? Okay, I'm going to say something very briefly then, but then we'll move on to the next one, which is just to say how pleased I am that this project has gone in this direction, not because I'm particularly interested in shoring up votes in East Barnwell, because actually that's not going to do me any good whatsoever, but because actually it's the right thing for our wider area. It is one of the most deprived areas in the whole county, and this is a project that actually in its new slightly wider form may bring actually much bigger benefits than would have been the case with the previous county project. I understand why there's frustration about it, because actually this is something which should have been it's been being discussed for years and years and years, and it would have been very good if this collaboration with the city could have happened earlier, but we are where we are, and actually there's huge potential there now. I think we'll move on now to the Red Kite Room, which I think probably is Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is me. As members will recall, a paper was brought to the March S&R committee to discuss some potential issues with the use of this room for full council. That paper identified 4 potential issues, and it was the decision of this committee that we bring it back at this committee meeting to update on those particular issues. And members will of course be aware that we use this room in July this year for full council as well, so we have some practical experience to bring to bear. I'll briefly run through the 4 issues and the outcomes of where we've got to on each of those to update members. Firstly, there were concerns regarding security and safety of members, primarily the proximity of public to members and the relative positions. As members will be aware from July's meeting, we have some screens in place which provide a degree of separation and protection for members, which I think certainly from our side we were happy with. We've also had consultations with Cambridgeshire Constabulary and others to risk assess the process, and certainly in terms of non-contentious meetings we are satisfied that it provides a suitable environment for conducting the meetings, both in terms of public and members. All meetings are subject to a security risk assessment in any event. So if we anticipate some form of protest or direct action, then we may need to look at alternative venues or alternative methods of having a meeting, but that's entirely normal for all forms of committee or council meetings where a risk is identified. So we're satisfied in terms of the use of this room for normal full council meetings, that it meets those requirements. The second issue related to limited space for members. On 2 occasions, we set out the room to demonstrate to members the layout. A number of concerns were expressed, and I have to, from my perspective as well, it did seem quite tight as a perception. However, the meeting was held in July, and I think it's fair to say there was sufficient room for members to conduct the meeting satisfactorily, noting that a number of members weren't present, but the room was able to fulfill its function. And in the absence of any direct responses, certainly that I've received, there was no particular issues raised in relation to the size of the room, although it remains relatively tight. It does work and is functional. Third option is the limited space for media and public attendees. The reality is that it's slightly smaller than the space that we had at Old Shire Hall. However, it does provide a reasonable degree of capacity for that, and there is a practical element to the number of people who do actually attend the meeting itself. And at the present time, we will continue to monitor that as to levels of attendance and whether we have excessive attendance at the meetings. The final issue is the one that is a little bit more involved, and that's around the accessibility in relation to fire safety, building regulations, and our requirement for public attendance. There is a capacity limitation on the room, as we discussed previously, of 4 mobility impaired persons, whether public or member, in this space when we have the full council meeting. That's in order to ensure that we can safely evacuate the space if we need to. Whilst the quality impact assessments and related activities were undertaken, that does impose a clear limitation on the use of the room in certain circumstances. However, it doesn't preclude the use of the room as long as we have the appropriate mechanisms in place and that we continue to monitor the demand for it. We are going to revisit and review the quality impact assessment around mobility and other issues from scratch to look at all aspects of it, including accessibility, and that work is already underway. But at the present time, and subject to experience of the meetings, the room is able to be used and compliant in that use, noting that we're trying to balance several different pieces of legislation, which to some degree are not contradictory, but overlap each other in ways that aren't entirely helpful on occasions. But the room can be used, but we anticipate there may again be meetings if there is particular interest where we may run into a problem or a challenge in terms of the levels of accommodation. But we will keep that under review as part of the overall package. So that is the overall position at the present time, that the room is usable for full council, but we do need to review the equalities part of it. There will be ongoing security and other risk assessments, which is, as I say, a normal part of our process between property and democratic services, but the room can be used in its current format.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring Stephen in and then I'll come to you, Richard.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose I just wanted to pick up the last point that Tony's raised for the benefit of members. I think it's only right and proper we revisit the equality impact assessment. I think it's equally important that, as he says, we need to keep this under continuous review. I think whilst we accept that meeting in full council held here was successful, I'm very conscious about the accessibility and safety issues that Tony's outlined. That means, in my view, I think we would need to continue to keep under review options for other sites, or indeed changes to the configuration of the room here. My suggestion to members would be, recognising that we will keep that under review, we may want to further report in due course, picking up those points around alternative options and indeed any changes we might want to consider to this building. I think that's probably an important clarification. And as Tony said, some of the legal imperatives here are actually, we may say, in slight conflict, but I'm very mindful of our duties under the Equality Act and the public sector equality duty, which we need to bear in mind, both from a member officer, but actually from a member of the public perspective, even more so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. Richard.
Well, thank you for bringing the report back and gauging views. I simply express a view in public. I've expressed to you in private. I don't think it's acceptable at all. I think the idea that we spend more money just adapting things, I think, would be a waste of money. I thank our staff for helping us make the best of this arrangement. But I think in the end, the previous administration built a new Shire Hall that just doesn't have a council chamber. And it's not acceptable to me that the very important decisions we debate, discuss and agree as a council of a 1 billion local authority is in the circumstances of something which is wholly inadequate in terms of the public interest in upholding the traditions and heritage of this council. It's not acceptable to me that we have to hope we'll have uncontentious meetings so that nobody wants to turn up. And it's not acceptable to me that we have to limit the number of disabled people that can come. And I think we should, as members, send a message back that this is not the long-term solution. My own view, as I've put, and I know we're not taking decisions today, is that we should turn this on its head and take advantage of it and say, we are going to go on the road in Cambridgeshire. We are going to follow our decentralisation objectives, and we're going to have a rotation of full council meetings around the county, probably 4 places. We know in the south we've had a successful meeting in Duxford. We know in Cambridge we've had successful meetings at the University Sports Centre and at the Corn Exchange. We know that Huntingdon Council, as we've seen, has made offers to us, and we've had successful meetings at Burgess Hall, and we've had a successful meeting at the Leisure Centre in Littleport. I know it's created a bit of a headache. I'm not looking at Michelle as I make these comments, but I think if we regularise it, if we know we're going to do a rotation around, for example, those 4, we'll get used to it. It will be better in terms of cost, and it'll be far better in terms of making this authority and its deliberations accessible to the public. And I'm very, very dissatisfied if we say, well, we can probably get away with it as long as we don't have enough wheelchair users. That is the wrong tone to this debate. We should be an accessible council, close to our citizens, encouraging public participation and upholding the traditions and the heritage of the authority. We can do better.
Thank you, Richard. Edna, and then Chris.
Thank you for that. I was a bit surprised to hear that there weren't some adverse comments after the last meeting, because I certainly made a few. I appreciate we sort of are where we are, and we may be stuck with this. It's a very good room for a committee, and it does allow the public in for a committee. But for a full council meeting, it was the experience of the 19th of July was we were just too close together, and that was albeit with many people missing. It was cramped, it was uncomfortable. If there were any numbers of members of the public, it would have been completely unworkable. They would have had to be turned away. There would be a large number of members of the public potentially sort of impeding the exit. It's not that easy for everybody to get out. So I just raised questions about the safety, and particularly, I mean, the issue about the mobility impaired, I won't repeat what Richard said, but I agree with that. It's having a maximum number which would cover us and the public just is not really acceptable. It's also, though, it isn't just about people with mobility problems. It's people who are clinically vulnerable, for example. It was incredibly uncomfortable for people who were clinically vulnerable in that meeting. And we shouldn't be imposing that kind of situation on them, being so close, so many people in such close proximity. And I agree, it's just not a debating chamber. We're all facing the front, and there are many Conservative members who, because I do not, unless I see them in a committee, I probably wouldn't recognise them. So I feel that if we can do something to address these issues, I think that would be good. But I think there are still some hard safety and accessibility issues that we do need to get under the skin of.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. I hadn't intended to speak on this subject, but I was rather shocked by the comments from Councillor Hewitt. Councillor Richard, you're no longer a member of the European Parliament. It's no longer necessary to have this peripatetic movement of meetings from one place to another, which I know you had for many, many years, but it is in practice quite inefficient. There is quite a cost which is involved to that. Now, I'm not saying in principle that is a wrong thing for us to do, but I think it really is important that we very carefully consider what the effects of all of that would be. One example being, I think that it would be a highly retrograde step to go back to having any meetings of this council within Cambridge City, because we know the problems there are of congestion within Cambridge City. We're now thankfully out of Cambridge City as an organisation for holding meetings. Why not would we want to add back to the very congestion that we ourselves say needs to be sorted out? So I think that we need to consider the implications quite carefully. I'm also I don't know whether it's a deliberate passive aggressiveness on the part of Councillor Hewitt, or whether he just wants to needle me, in which case he's very successful. But if you are going to list all the areas where we could hold meetings, why do you exclude Fenland? Why should we not have a meeting place? Why should it only be all the other districts which are within county council? So, Chair, I actually personally I welcome what the Chief Executive says, that we should keep this very much under review. It may be necessary, let alone whether it's desirable or not, but it may be necessary for us to make a change, in which case that will become apparent in time. But if we do make a change, let's be quite clear about what the implications of all of that will be. Let's make sure that we don't do anything negative as well as doing something which may be positive. And if we are going to start going around the county, please can Fenland have its fair share as well and not be excluded. Thank you.
I don't see any other hands on this item. I'm just going to return us back to the comments made by the Chief Executive, which is that this will be kept under review, and I'm certainly expecting that we will do some exploring of other options, whether those are changes to this building or visits to other buildings, and we may well do both of those in the quite close future. Let's move now to the third of the items on the list, which is the ventilation.
Thank you, Chair. Slight nervous as this relates to a procurement issue. However, it's very much a positive one. So as members will be aware, ventilation is very much a key issue in the post-COVID environment that we're in, and we've just talked about those issues in passing. As part of our ongoing process of looking at our entire estate, and with particular focus on our frontline services, things like children's centres, community centres, social care, we've initiated a process where we've gone around and assessed ventilation across the estate and identified opportunities to improve it, to facilitate better utilisation of buildings and rooms, to facilitate frontline service delivery. In particular, we have large spaces where there is scope to have a large number of people in the space, but the current levels of ventilation in those spaces doesn't meet the necessary requirements. And so this particular item relates to seeking approval for a procurement process to go and improve the ventilation across 64 buildings, as I say, focused primarily on frontline delivery sites, to improve that ventilation to support our frontline services in delivering their services through the ventilation improvements. It's accessing a mixture of existing property maintenance funding, but also some time-limited pandemic-related funding that we can use to deliver this project, which will give us the long-term benefits in terms of service delivery. We estimate at the moment, and this is subject to detailed design and costing work by our consultants, somewhere in the region of about £725,000 to £960,000, which will give us a very comprehensive improvement in the ventilation capacity of our estate, and essentially future-proof us as best we can in relation to COVID or any other variants. And there will be similar knock-ons in terms of flu and other seasonal airborne viruses and pathogens. So the essence is seeking approval for the procurement to proceed on that basis, using access to funding, which has been agreed in principle already, and delegating this to the Section 151 officer to oversee and approve the procurement process so that we can proceed with the works at the earliest opportunity. It builds on the back of our existing programme, which started with CO2 monitors across the estate, which is the most effective way of assessing ventilation and therefore COVID and related risks. We've also done the quick and easy wins in terms of changes to ventilation within our building, putting in small fans and things. And this is the next phase, which is the more complex ventilation works, and hence the significant sum involved, but we'll deliver that improvement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Alan.
Thank you, Lucy. It might be a naive question, and if it is, I'm looking at 3.3 where it mentions education centres. I'm presuming that's not schools. I just wonder, obviously, what responsibility we have for the non-academy estate in terms of this issue. And it may come from a different budget, but yeah, it looks like we're looking at, it's all admirable, adult centres, children's centres. I just wonder where we lie with schools.
So yes, so academies clearly fall under the academies themselves. The maintained schools primary sits with the school in terms of the maintenance and compliance activity. The education centres referred to here are the specialist facilities that we have within our estate, so essentially outside of the school's function. However, we are fully involved with supporting our maintained schools, and indeed we provide consultancy to some of the academies as well. So although this is separate, it's all part of a bigger picture across the entire council.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands on this one. So unless there's anything else on these papers, we will move to the recommendations. And I haven't heard anybody speak against the recommendations. I do think it's important to be clear that on recommendation B, we have made clear in the debate that this is remaining under review and that there will be further steps to look at the issues around accessibility in particular. But other than that, if we could move to the vote on these en bloc. So all those in favour of the recommendations, please show. And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Then we move to the next item on the agenda, which is the corporate risk register. So if the head of diligence and best value would be. Sorry, it's the corporate business plan and strategies, which is Sue. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you very much. So this paper recognises that we're refreshing our strategic framework and our business planning papers at a time of uncertainty. Tom has already referenced this in terms of the financial uncertainty and the impact that we've seen on inflation across our council budgets, which means that the outlook is more challenging than we'd anticipated earlier this year. So in the light of this, in the coming weeks, we're going to continue to clarify our situation with government, alongside updating our commitments under the 5 council priorities within the existing strategic framework to ensure that they set out clearly what we're delivering whilst taking account of the situation that we find ourselves in. To assist with this process, in paragraph 2.6, we're suggesting that strategy and resources come together in November so that we can have a workshop together on the strategic framework and that we can develop this framework together ahead of it coming back to the Strategy and Resources Committee in December, alongside our updated budget position. The paper also touches on decentralisation, which was discussed at the Strategy and Resources Committee meeting in June. I and my colleagues are taking forward the activity that was set out in that paper in June, mindful that the actions we take need to be practical and need to make a difference to our residents. As an example of that, in recent weeks, we have been focusing on the delivery of the Household Support Fund, working really closely with a range of partners so that we can link people into other sources of practical support. Information indicates that the majority of the 35,000 plus applications that have been made by people from across the county are from the most deprived areas of the county who are struggling with the cost of living. I'm pleased to say that today we've received confirmation from government that a more flexible approach will be adopted in the next phase of the Household Support Fund, which starts tomorrow. And we have sent information out about that to all councillors earlier today. So I just want to assure councillors that there will be more to follow on all of this activity in the coming months, and just draw your attention to the recommendation, which is to note the content of the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. Comments or questions on this? Graham.
I fully support what Sue has written here. I just wonder, Sue, why the corporate risk register isn't included as one of the documents forming the strategic framework. Because when we discuss it later, that to me is quite an important piece of work.
I think that's a very interesting point, because I think once the strategic framework is established, then that needs to flow through into the service plans in each of the services that relates to all the committee work, and then through into our assessment of our performance, and also our continual sight on all of our risks. So I think all of those pieces of work are interrelated, and I think that's a very helpful comment to make that more apparent in the way we pull the strategic framework together. Thank you.
Richard.
First, I think we should welcome Sue to the meeting and the report. It's great to see you here, and thank you for the report. Two very minor points. One is on the strategy. Let's not wander too far without consciously doing so from the joint administration agreement. I know we don't have the JA agreement tracker on this committee agenda. I hope it will reappear in future ones. And I think as an administration, we've done some hard work on strategy and don't want to rewrite it in the main, although we should always be open to new evidence and new opportunities. So please make sure that in any work that goes on, that's at the heart of what comes forward. And secondly, on decentralisation, I welcome what's in the paper, but compared with the June report, you've missed off the list this time that issue of direct citizen participation, citizens' assemblies, direct democracy, which is one strand of what we want to see in terms of the pilots. I'm sure that wasn't intentionally left off, but could that go in the minutes and be very much part of the overall pie? But I welcome what is written in the report.
Thank you. Any further comments? I don't see any further comments, and I think this is to note, so we don't need to vote on it. Thank you very much for your work on it, Sue, and I know you've got quite a lot more work to do in the coming months.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So now we move to the corporate risk register, and actually, so I'm going to Neil. So Neil, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies to committee for not being able to attend in person today. This report summarises the status of those corporate risks facing the council, and it also pens the current corporate risk register. Just for context, the Strategy and Resources Committee is responsible for the development and oversight of the council's risk management and strategy, and the committee today is being recommended to note and comment on the corporate risk register, which is appended to the report. To give some introduction, at the last corporate leadership team meeting on the 22nd of August 2022, the corporate risks were fully reviewed, and at that meeting, committee will note that risk 3, the council does not have enough budget to deliver agreed short and medium term corporate objectives, was assessed at that point to be in excess of the council's risk appetite. So it's rated red in the categories between 16 and 25. This perhaps isn't surprising given the current challenges in the financial environment. At that meeting, CLT also agreed that a potential new corporate risk around climate change would be drafted for challenge and consideration at the next CLT session. And as can also be seen, since the last review cycle, the corporate risk that assesses the council's arrangements for safeguarding vulnerable adults, children and young people has now been split into 2 corporate risks, risk 1 and 2, and there's a new corporate risk that assesses cybercrime, and that's risk 9. One thing to note is that although public health does have its own risk register, it doesn't have an obvious corporate risk, and very few existing corporate risks have public health triggers. The Public Health Risk Register in itself is presented to Adults and Health Committee for challenge, but it's not reviewed by either Strategy and Resources Committee or Audit and Accounts Committee. CLT identified this as a gap in risk oversight and have determined that it would include the Public Health Risk Register in a quarterly cycle reporting alongside the Corporate Risk Register rather than create a new corporate risk, so to avoid unnecessary duplication but still allow the escalation of risk to the risk register should CLT feel that's appropriate. I'd also like to specifically highlight what I believe is a really positive addition to the governance that supports good risk management at the council. CLT has decided that a focused and specific meeting covering both assurance and risk issues will be held quarterly to enable a deeper dive and scrutiny of the corporate risk register. That meeting will also give CLT collectively the opportunity to review and challenge a sample of directorate risk registers at the council. And that also includes the assurances that have been relied upon by individual executive directors that the recorded key controls are proportionate, effective and operating well in practice. In line with feedback received at the last Strategy and Resources Committee, the remainder of this section of the report gives a summary of each corporate risk. It details the owner, the date it was last reviewed, a brief overview of the risk, the raw and residual risk alongside narrative supporting any change in scoring. Hopefully that makes the report a little bit more easier to wade through rather than just it being a big appendix at the back. And then finally, by way of context and added assurance, the Corporate Risk Register was discussed and challenged at yesterday's Audit and Accounts Committee meeting. One area of challenge was the extent to which the current and anticipated financial pressures that are facing the council will be a more likely trigger across the remainder of risks identified in the Corporate Risk Register. This and any other points raised today will be specifically addressed by CLT at the scheduled Risk Management CLT meeting next Tuesday. I will leave it there and happy to take any comments and observations. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Neil, for a thorough explanation. I'm going to Graham first.
Thanks, Chair. So just to reiterate what Neil was saying, yesterday we had an audit accounts meeting that Chris, Alan and Tom were at, and Stephen, and we raised the issue about the lack of resources in the future and how that may have a knock-on impact on the likelihood of some other things not being delivered. So they've agreed to go away and look at that. There were two other issues which were raised. One was about the safety valve, which we'll hear about in the confidential session later. And the second was about HR and the availability of staff, and particularly social worker vacancies and the other high vacancies that we have in certain parts of the organisation. So a good discussion, and I think others would agree that we had quite a robust challenge of what was being put, and we were pleased to hear that CLT were now taking this extremely seriously, and we're going to be looking at it again from next week onwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Graham. Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would agree with Graham. It was a good, we did go through it quite well, in detail yesterday, and I raised the one about the HR, whether Stephen wants to come repeat the answers there, but I don't know. But it was certainly a good challenge, because that was one, knowing the issues we have around, and we're not unique. Loads of other organisations have issues around recruitment and retention. It was a question as to why that's amber rather than red, really. But yeah, it was I thought it was a good challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard.
Yeah, I don't think we should repeat the debate from yesterday, but it gives me lots of confidence that the Audit and Accounts Committee is doing its work, and I'm sure that what you said yesterday will be taken on board. I'd like to agree with the point about climate a risk on climate change. I think that's really important. The other points are to do with the committee I chair, perhaps understandably, but I agree with what's being said about public health. Don't reproduce that. That's excellent what you've come up with as an idea there. The only thing that I thought going through risk number 1, safeguarding of adults, I thought was really well phrased in terms of quality of services, possible shortfalls, and then how we deal with them. I thought it was very well phrased. What I didn't see there, and I do apologise if I missed it, but what I didn't see there was if there's a risk to a person because of delay between when they first approach us and when they access the service. And we all know waiting lists are of concern. Let's not hide that. We all know that our resources are limited, and that sometimes leads to unwelcome delays. And I didn't see that aspect in the risk as it was outlined, and I think it should be there.
Thank you. Helpful points. Chris. Sam, and then Chris.
It's very kind of you.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Sam.
it was on the similar point to Richard, that point 1, something else that I think needs adding, which is missing, if people wouldn't mind, is obviously we've probably all seen the news, Edenfield, and obviously it's an NHS hospital, but there's many cases of local authorities with similar type cases. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that's happening in Cambridgeshire, but as we all know, we do have to really be careful to safeguard vulnerable adults as well as children. And in the point about children, there is a bit about whistleblowing policies and robust procedures, but that isn't in the adults part, and it needs to be. So, because I think it's just probably maybe a accidental omission, but obviously it's quite an important feature.
Thank you, Sam, Chris, and then maybe I'll come to Stephen.
Thank you, Lucy. I think we all find the risk reports which are produced interesting, and we look at the RAG ratings and we raise points as a result of what we see. But that isn't the main purpose and the main value that a risk management system has. And the main thing that we need to assure ourselves about is that the system of risk management is in place adequately for management to maintain a review of and a management of risk, and that management is sufficient in its scope, in its timeliness, and in the granularity of risk which is looked at. Bearing that in mind, I look at what's in front of us today, and I think that we are continuing to move in the correct direction of travel. I particularly do welcome the public health lacuna, which is closed off by the proposal that we have in front of us. And I hope that we continue with this. The change of the risk management systems will be continuous. It should never stop. If it stops, we know we've got a problem. So I'm pleased that there's a review. I'm pleased that things are changing, and I expect there will be more changes in the future.
Thank you. Absolutely right. Stephen.
Just a very brief comment, Chair, to say thank you to Councillors Howard and Hoy, both of whom have made very relevant comments that will pick up around risks 1 and 2 in terms of adult safeguarding and children's safeguarding. I think the point around the whistleblowing arrangements being mirrored in the adults risk particularly needs to be captured fully. I also absolutely accept the point around the shocking instances of care breaches in another part of the country that some of us saw in Panorama earlier this week. Those were previously similar circumstances as a result of the Winterbourne review, which happened elsewhere. So I think in terms of how we manage that risk for commissioned services across the county and direct services, again, needs to be something we frame properly. So I think those are really helpful points. And then lastly, Chair, to Councillor Bowden's comments, just welcome those and agree that it does need to be a dynamic system of risk management. And I think the introduction of the quarterly, if I can call them deep dive risk meetings with the corporate leadership team, will be a helpful addition to the current arrangement. So we'll continue to keep that under review. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And then Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Just to comment on the discovery, I'll use that word today, that we haven't got a corporate risk on environmental matters. I find that quite shocking. And I find it quite shocking that I hadn't noticed it myself. You know, but with the greatest respect to the ruling administration, you've been telling the world that meeting the deadlines on carbon, meeting the deadlines on anything to do with environmental is up there as your #1 goal, and yet we haven't got a risk on it on the corporate leadership team. I find that quite a shock. But, and this is an own goal I can't resist, but your leader of your environmental team has bought a tin can to sit in front of her today. I wasn't sure whether that was an environmental statement or for kicking further down the road. So I'll leave that one with you. but I totally endorse the fact that we could do with a absolute risk on the environmental issues, because with the costs and everything coming up, there's going to need an awful lot more scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any more hands, so I will say thank you very much to Neil for the report. And I think there've been a lot of very constructive comments. One finally slightly less constructive one at the end. I think I particularly want to thank Councillor Bowden for his comments about the need for the risk register to keep changing, and I think that that's really apparent looking at this one. One of the key risks on this, and the one, and it has a huge impact on the corporate risk 3, is the continued process of the safety valve process, which is one of the things we're about to be discussing later on. That risk may change in the next few months. The point about the environmental risk is that actually in the middle of this summer, there was very nearly a critical incident involving an environmental matter, and the extent of that risk for us as an authority became exceptionally clear, because the danger to the fire service on that day when it was 40 degrees was extreme, and our risks do keep changing, and we do need to keep reviewing them, and that will continue. And I think the risk to this council of political and financial uncertainty also increased very significantly last Friday. So we will keep our risk register under review, and it will need to keep changing in response to an extraordinary level of change in the events around us. In the meantime, thank you very much, Neil, for an excellent report and many good discussions on it.
Thank you, Chair.
And again, I think this is something that we have noted and commented on, and we don't need to vote on it. So thank you very much. And we will move to item 9, which is the agenda plan, training plan and appointments, and that's for Michelle.
The agenda plan and training plan are as set out on the agenda, so I'm happy to take any comments.
Any comments? I don't see any comments. So thank you very much for that, Michelle. I think the next thing is that we move into exempt session for confidential items 12 and 13. So at this point, I propose to resolve that the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the agenda contains exempt information under paragraphs 3 and 5 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed, as it refers to information relating to the financial business affairs, etc. Can I have a seconder for that proposal, please? Thank you, Sam. And all those in favour of moving into exempt session, please raise your hands. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. I think we'll take a 5-minute break while we stop the live stream, and then we'll return for the next bit on the agenda. So thank you all very much.